Hello, BookTube. We're down here again in Poppy territory to continue with my library tour Redux. I'm going to do, I guess, my whole library again. I kind of was hoping to play. I was kind of planning on doing a grand library tour in 2019 after a grand library reorganization, but like so many of the rest of you, those plans, when I make them, always seem one grasp out of reach. I do plan on it, but why wait? It's been a long time since I did a library tour, and I figure if I start with biography, we can just move on from there, and it'll be a way to occupy the summer. So we're down here in puppy territory because we are going through the biography shelves. I'm going to start with my favorite books, my favorite genre, and this is bookshelf number 2 of the library bookshelf tour Redux for biography. The first one is an old, oversized thing from the Johns Hopkins University Press. They did, back when the Harvard University Press shelf of classics was popular, lots of other people did that too, uniform editions of people like Sir Walter Scott or Milton or whatnot, that unfortunately those uniform editions often had a lot of very good scholarship in them. And sometimes a lot of original content. But unfortunately, as Mark at Richardson Reads and I saw just the other day, they end up at library book sales for the whole set going for $5, unfortunately, because nobody wants them. And this was the keynote, this was the kind of the end volume of a set of that kind. And I'm a perfect example. I'm a big fan of this author, but I wouldn't dream of having the set. There are better critical editions of the set. This was the works of Edmund Spenser, the poet, who I think I may be his only living fan. and when Hopkins was done with a uniform edition of his works, they did a biography of Edmund Spenser. This is by Who and When. This came out in 1945, and it's written by Alexander Judson. And it will not have any original context, any original scholarship, but it's beautifully written. It stands in lieu of later biographies. There was a big, fat Spenser biography from Yale a few years ago. I read it, I really liked it, I reviewed it, and I had it, and it was in this library shelf, and I got rid of it. I honestly don't know why. The omissions on these shelves, I really notice. I really pay attention to them because I want them back. If I saw that Spenser, it's a big fat thing, 3 times the size of this. If I saw that, I would definitely get it to supplement this one. But this one's really, really good in the meantime. The next one is a classic, a great 20th century biography. This is Lord David Cecil's biography of his ancestor, Lord Melbourne, the Lord M, Queen Victoria's Lord M, who set the tone for a lot of the mid-19th century in British politics, and who, it's an informal process, but it's more important than we give it credit a lot of times, I think. He was a one-person tutor on the art of politics and governance for the young queen. And that was at a time when it meant a lot, when that was really important. But on top of all that, on top of the curiosities like that, his role in Victoria's reign was odd. And it's also a bit of a curiosity that a descendant of his would write his biography. But the main thing is that this is beautifully written. It's just beautifully, beautifully done. Long stretches all throughout the book that are just incredible flights of prose, so that you wouldn't change a word. That's always makes me go back to it. So the next one I go back to all the time for slightly more personal reasons, but it's a great book. It's a great, great book, and almost all of you, whether you know it or not, and most of you don't know it, owe a lot of reading pleasure to this woman. This is Dear Genius, the letters of Elizabeth Nordstrom, who was forever and ever the lead children's literature poobah editor in the Western world, despite the fact that it was a job made for men, and she was a woman doing it, and she had a phenomenal instinct for the children's literature that crossed her desk. She had a phenomenal instinct for what things might explode into popularity, and was responsible for a lot of the classics that are a part of the landscape of children's literature, and was also an utterly delightful person. As these letters show over and over again, she could be very, very stern if somebody stepped out of line with her, but most people didn't. Her reputation preceded her once she became an institution. And she was an incredible combination of ruthless taskmaster and caring mother figure for all of her errant authors, whether they needed, $100 in cash or whether they needed a handhold to make sure that they knew, as she often said, dear genius, to make sure that they knew what she never lost sight of, which is that they were writing forever. They're writing forever, not just for today, not just for the month's trying times. In other words, a perfect editor. And just the thing you want. Editors don't. The popular conception of editors is that they catch spelling mistakes. But the real perfect editor... here. What are you doing? Sorry, I broke my own rule to step out of the frame, but Frida found a ball of lint and was eating it. I don't want the baby eating lint. But anyway, what I was saying is the real job of a great editor is to believe in their writers. And that's a tough thing. That's not an infinite resource. This book captures her better than any biography could. So I go back to it all the time when I need a little touch of that belief. And the next one is also a classic. The literary world has seen, I don't even know how many biographies of this person since this book came out. This also was from the 1940s, I believe. 1939. And this is by Henry Seidel Canby. And it's Canby's Thoreau. It's his biography of Henry David Thoreau. And you might think, well, okay, it's a Thoreau book, and you just recently recommended a Thoreau biography by a completely different guy, and much, much, much later. So surely they can't both be must-reads. And I would sacrifice Richardson's book on Thoreau for this one. This because this has greater eloquence. It's not like Henry David Thoreau, to paraphrase an old friend of mine, it's not like Henry David Thoreau is going anywhere. So really it's a question of whose voice you like talking about him, and I have a marked preference for this author. And this is also a lovely edition. You have the fox on a wintry field there, and they had the confidence to put no chatter on the back, just one whole painting. So that I think, if I remember correctly, I don't have Richardson's book on Thoreau here in this section. So this may be the only Thoreau book that I have. Then this next one is huge. From 2015, this is Langdon Hammer's biography of James Merrill, the great poet James Merrill. There is James Merrill, as just about as beautiful as a young person could be when he was a young man. He would have been on BookTube without any hesitation, no doubt in my mind. He would have been one of those booktubers who everybody in the comments field said, oh boy, you're pretty, and who left every 3 months and then started again. He would have done that, but he wouldn't have missed it for the world. And this is a huge, wonderful, soup to nuts biography, and the reason that I have the Reader's Advance copy is because, believe it or not, Knopf never sent me a finished copy of this book. And of course, I've never seen it in a used bookstore, because nobody ever gives this up. It's just so good that nobody ever gives it up for sale. The minute that I see a finished copy at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, I will grab it. But maybe I don't need to. The advanced copy is certainly held up well in multiple rereadings, in whole or in part. Then this next one I have mentioned before. This next one I mentioned it the last time we did a biography bookshelf tour, and I mentioned it every time this author comes up. This is one of my favorite authors, Robert Louis Stevenson, and this is a great biography of him by Frank McGlynn. I've had to reinforce mine 6 ways from Sunday, and I don't know if you can make it out on camera, but it's scuffed and waterlogged and damaged, and there's a little bit of darkness on the edge there, and that's because once upon a time, oh God, I don't even know, 25 years ago now, I left Boston. I went on vacation out of state. And as soon as I crossed state lines, my apartment burned. And the people I was living with got my beagles out and brought them down to the sidewalk. But they couldn't rescue anything else. And the fire department had to blow out the window on the 3rd floor. That's where I was. I was on the 3rd floor. They had to blow out the window in order to funnel in the fire hose. So from what I can gather, I was far away. I was many states away when this happened. But from what I can gather, for like the better part of an hour, fire department, fire hose was blasting straight at my biography wall. and Robert Louis Stevenson was probably on a stack at the very end, the books that I use all the time, and so escaped with minimal damage. Boy, oh boy. When I came back, of course, as soon as I learned, I turned on a dime and came back. And when I entered that living room and saw, it's a sight none of you should ever see. I saw a mound as tall as my head, just a literal mound of what had been my biographies. They'd all been pulled off the shelves and put in the middle of the room, and they were so soaked and smoldering that they were melding into each other. There was no chance of saving anything. But you could, heartbreakingly, sort of look at that pile and see what was in there. I have photographs of those biography walls, so I actually do know what I don't have. But this one survived. It was one of the few books I have of any kind that survived. And I love it. I go back to it all the time. I see sometimes the hardcover of this, and I grab it whenever I do, but I always prefer this trade paperback because it's a Pimlico trade paperback. I love Pimlico trade paperbacks. Just love them. I think we'll see a few more of them, actually, on this library bookshelf tour. The next one is a bit of an oddity. I remember getting a lot of responses years ago when I did this library bookshelf tour the first time I showed it to you, but I'm sticking by my guns. This is a terrific book. It's The Other Man by Michael Bergen, who some of you may know because he was a Calvin Klein model with a poster 90 feet tall in Times Square. Others of you might know him as a cast member on Baywatch. For years and years, he was a cast member on Baywatch. And what this book reveals is that for a long time, while all of that was going on, he was also in a torrid sexual affair with Carolyn Bessette, who was the fiancée and then the wife of John F. Kennedy Jr., and who died with him when his plane went down. Of course, the book got some attention in the press, most of it invidious, most of it very uncomplimentary to Mike Bergen, because it's one thing for you to write a torrid tell-all of a troubled young woman once she's not around to give her side of the story. It's another thing, these critics said, to write that you were, as the title says, the other man in an illicit affair with a married woman. It struck a lot of critics as just unseemly from beginning to end. And I'm convinced that although a lot of those critics weighed in on this subject, I think the only way that you could call this book unseemly from beginning to end is if you had not read it. If you read it, you see something very different from that easy thumbnail. This is a heartfelt and extremely readable book, and it's not just about that affair. It's about a whole bunch of. It's a snapshot of a young man and an era. And it's really, really well done. You look at stuff like this and you automatically think you know what it is because most celebrity tell-all books like this are exactly what you think they are. But not this one. I stand by it. That is the young couple in pre-Kennedy days. You will not be doing a disservice to the dead if you point out what I think anyone would notice, which is that he was a lot prettier than she was. But he owed her a lot. She believed in him a lot. She had troubles of her own, but she was a shaping force and a sleepless force. So it's a fascinating book. If you are at the Strand's outdoor carts and you see a copy of it for 50 cents or $1, my advice would be give it a try and see what you make of it. Especially since without this advice in your ear, I don't think you would even think about it. I think you would just look right past it, and it has worth in it that is you would miss otherwise. And this next one we've seen recently. This is Natalie Dykstra. This is Clover Adams, a biography of Henry Adams's troubled wife, from her spottily documented and weirdly fascinating life, all the way to her big hovering question mark of a death. Was it suicide? Was it a mistake? What was it that took Clover Adams out of this world? The thing that most just casual people know about her is that she is let me see if I can find it. She is the inspiration for one of the most haunting funerary monuments in existence. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it really quickly. I am just assuming here that it's in this book because you couldn't do a book on Clover Adams without it. But I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it. I wish I could put pictures to annotate these things, but I can't. No, and maybe Natalie Dykstra decided that was very intentional. Maybe she decided not to put that monument in here intentionally to keep her subject from feeling dead on the page. You don't, as a biographer, you don't want your subject to be dead on the page. But if you were to Google Clover Adams monument, those 3 words on Google, you will see It's disturbing. It will stop you dead in your tracks, even though you don't know her, even though you don't know the story. It happens all the time in the burying ground where it is. People will walk by it without even knowing anything about it, without expecting that it's even there, and it stops them. It just has that kind of power. But anyway, the book is wonderful. The book is the final word on Clover Adams. Then we have a Belknap Press reprint of a book. Reprint of a translation of a work, and it's a point that's going to come up on this biography shelf tour many times. And that point is, I wouldn't be surprised if it comes up again on this shelf itself, just this shelf. The point is that I really don't need to go out and get any biographies. They will all eventually come to me. All of them will. I would be willing to bet that even Michael Bergen's book, The Other Man, will be reprinted in my lifetime and come to me for free at my door. There's no reason for me to do that, and this is a perfect example. This is Jane Marie Todd's translation of Anne-Marie Eddy's biography of Saladin, with a great Gustave Doré engraving on the cover there. This is just thrilling, just a thrillingly vivid biography, even in English translation. And I would once upon a time have coveted it, you know, in either the original or in the hardcover somewhere along the line in some bookstore, and here the reprint came to me. And I've read other books on Saladin in the years since this. This was, when did this come out? This was, do I have a pub sheet still in here? No. No, I might not have had a pub sheet because I might not have been reviewing when I got this. This came out in 2011, yeah, so I wasn't reviewing. There have been other biographies of him since then, but nothing anywhere near as good. Okay. This next one is a classic. I'm a little biased on the subject, I admit, but this is a classic. This is the greatest book on its subject. This is by Bob Asprey, and this is his book on Frederick the Great, The Magnificent Enigma. And that is Frederick the Great performing one of his own works for the flute. And there have been two other Frederick the Great biographies, big soup to nuts, popular press biographies of Frederick since then, and they don't hold a candle to this, as far as I'm concerned. I could be wrong about that. I have a rather long history with this book, so I think it's magnificent, just magnificent. I in fact grab copies of it whenever I see them in order to give them to people. I do occasionally see this at used bookstores. Oh goodness gracious. Okay, all right. Well, this next one's got to be very old. This has got to be 1929. This is by David Loth, and it is a biography of Lorenzo de Medici, which for some reason has a portrait of Geronimo on the cover. And this, I probably got it just because it's, Loth is he's a very frothy, excitable writer. It's very entertaining to read. And I get everything about Lorenzo de Medici. I get everything popular that's done about the Italian Renaissance. But it's also very good, like for instance, when you have, I think next year, I think in 2020, there's a gigantic biography of Lorenzo de Medici coming out, something like 1,000 pages long. And, hold that pose.